Jumping Off a Bridge by Gregory Brandt. One of my favorite shows growing up was Quantum Leap, with the character Sam Beckett and his wise talking hologram from the future, Al. The show had such a strong impact on me, years later I would write a full episode for a college screenwriting class. I learned a lot from this particular screenwriting class. The instructor was a former instructor of Robert Rodriguez, the award-winning director. I still use some of the techniques I learned in this class when I'm making music videos with the Street Cats. Our final project was to write a full-length television episode, and the professor was very impressed with my Quantum Leap episode. I had it set up where Sam Beckett, the lead character, leaps into a hippie at Woodstock where he's supposed to save a young woman. I used all the cues from the show. I was so familiar with it. I had conservative Sam forced to smoke a doobie with his friends at the Woodstock concert, and I made Sam hesitant and unsure, just how his character, played by Scott Bakula, usually acted. Then I had his friend Al, the wisecracking hologram, the guy with, questionable values towards sex and drugs, encourage the goody two-shoes Sam protagonist to take part and live it up. The professor was so impressed, he said he actually thought about looking up past episodes of Quantum Leap to see if I truly came up with the story or just ripped it off from an earlier episode. This was toward the end of the semester, so the teacher knew I was a good writer, but I gotta admit, it didn't hurt for him to point out just how good I was. How is a great writer going to know he's a great writer if nobody ever tells him so? The best field goal kicker in the world doesn't play for the Dallas Cowboys. The best field goal kicker in the world probably never picked up an American football. You can say the same thing about the best mathematician or the best actor or the best anything. The best actor in the world has probably never been in a movie. He probably sells insurance in China or Russia or anywhere. Everyone wants to be an actor. So the people you see on the screen, they're not the best, not even close to it. The people on the screen either got incredibly lucky or, more than most likely, they have family connections, nepotism. They were born rich. Most stars of movies and music are not quote-unquote self-made. Far from it. Most of them, especially now, grew up with a silver spoon shoved up there. Another writing I had during college, during my first semester, was our first assignment, basically my first college paper. We were told to write a personal story, and I wrote about a trip to Lake McQueeney with my newspaper sales crew in 1994 when my twin brother and I were 14. We had just started working for John in the newspaper crew, which we would go on to work for the next 4 years, and I would become the best salesman, the top salesman the newspaper had ever seen. My brother and I, we had such a great week, mainly me, that our boss wanted to credit us. He wanted to give us a little treat, so he took the whole crew out to this particular lake near Seguin, Texas in New Braunfels. The quote-unquote lake was a very small body of water coming out from the Guadalupe River, and there were supposedly railroad tracks over the lake which we could climb up, jump off, dive off into the water. The railroad tracks bridge was about 3 stories high, but that wasn't the most dangerous part. The most dangerous part was the fast-moving freight train that came speeding out of nowhere every 45 minutes. Once you climbed all the way up there and looked down, you kind of didn't want to jump, but once you hear the freight train barreling down, it leaves you with very limited options. There's basically nowhere to stand except for a slender steel beam. If you're standing on the tracks when the train's coming, even if you're on the side, there's sparks flying everywhere and the train's a foot away from your face. I had to find this out the hard way. It was one of those instances where I shouldn't have listened to my twin brother. My brother is a horrible leader. My fraternal twin brother is a horrible leader. And when I followed him growing up, he'd always lead us right off a cliff, metaphorically speaking. John, our newspaper boss, brought burgers, sodas, and beers. There was a few families there at the lake that day. They were sitting on the side of the water and in the water, splashing around. But we were the only ones dumb enough, hiking up the railroad tracks and jumping into the water. Looking back, I see all the dangerous and shady things our boss, John, had us do, and I'm surprised he wasn't thrown in jail or sued. Even though I learned more from John Ornalis than any other adult, he was by far the worst behaved adult you could ever imagine. After we secured a spot for our cooler and the stuff on the beach on the side of the lake, we followed John down a dirt road, walked down this dirt road and up the side of this hill to the railroad tracks. We waited for a train to come by past first, and then we began walking down the middle of the tracks to the particular jumping spot. I remember it was me, Michael, Greg Ortega, Alex Moreno, and John's 2 sons, David and Dustin, were all there. Once we got to the spot, we were supposed to jump. 40-year-old John didn't hesitate and with seconds swan dived into the water. He said that he had to go first to make sure it was deep enough, which was true. John jumped, was in the air for about 3 seconds before gracefully going into the water. He popped back up a few seconds later and said, "Hot dog, the water's perfect. Come on, guys, jump, jump." Then a couple seconds later, John's 2 sons, David and Dustin, both jumped. They were younger than me and my brother, but they had been here before and it wasn't their first time jumping. Then a few minutes later, James Mejia, Alex, and Greg Ortega all jumped, and before you know it, it was just me and my brother staring down 3 stories at our friends splashing in the water below. They were screaming at us, "Jump, guys, come on, don't be scared." However, me and my brother Michael were scared. We didn't want to jump. Michael, my brother, suggested we walk back down. I knew that we would be given hell the whole ride back from the guys, but I was going to listen to my brother, and we started walking the long walk with our heads down, too afraid to jump. But right when we started walking, we weren't walking more than 2 minutes down the middle of the tracks, and we heard the sound of the train engine, then the horn, then we saw it coming. We had barely gotten 20 feet down the tracks. We had to get back to the jump spot. The jump spot was the only place to stand if a train came. We had nowhere to go, and the train was barreling down on us any second. The kids in the water and everybody was yelling at us. They're like, "Jump, jump!" There wasn't enough time to get our feet set and jump. At least that's what we thought. And so my brother just yells, "Hold on!" And he shows me this flimsy wire to hold on to where we stood. We kept our feet steady on this slender steel beam and holding onto this wire, trying not to move too much. Then the train came. The train is like a foot away from my fucking face. One false move and we would have been toast. Train toast. The wire was flinging and swinging us to the movement of the train, but our feet were not allowed to move from the slight steel beam. Right before the train got there, everyone in the water below, even the families, were yelling, "Jump, jump, hurry before the train comes." And when the train came flying by, we were on the opposite of the lake. And they didn't know if we could see us. They couldn't know if we survived. The train took forever. It must have been one of those special extra long freight trains that travel 1,000,000 miles per hour. When the train finally passed and stopped and the sparks ended, it felt like we had just had a parade and circus walk over our heads. There was a few seconds of silence before someone in the water below yelled, "Are you alive?" And I yelled back, "Yes, we are alive." I didn't use a Scottish accent, but just the same, a round of applause came from everybody below. Now, I don't know who's listening to this, but getting a round of applause, especially a spontaneous round of applause, is not something you take for granted unless you're a famous stand-up comedian or you give daily TED Talks. It's not something that happens very often. I looked at my brother and he still wanted to walk back down the coward's way, but I said, fuck that. After what we just survived, jumping in the water is nothing. I took a deep breath, took one step and jumped into the water, keeping my arms and keeping me balanced in the air, hitting the water hard. It felt like it went down 20 feet, and when I finally came back up, there was another round of applause, even louder than the first. My brother followed my lead and jumped after I did. He wouldn't have jumped if I didn't do it first. Michael hit the water, came back up, and also received a round of applause. We would end up going back to that lake a few times over the next few years. And last night when I thought about this story, I looked the bridge up online. I figured there'd be dozens of young people doing the exact same thing that we did, but I couldn't find a single YouTube video. I couldn't find a single picture. I could barely find a picture of the bridge. Anyone crazy enough to do these jumps? I guess they don't exist anymore. Maybe people wanted to prevent anybody from jumping or getting hurt, but I also think young people now, they're too conservative. Young people were harder in 1994. They took more risks. I remember maybe convincing half a dozen girls to go on romantic road trips with me as a teenager, but nowadays, I can't see any young people doing that. I'm Gregory Brandt.